In the unforgiving New Mexico territory of 1879, Penelope Mills has known only chains disguised as duty, until the day she escapes her cruel employer and finds unexpected refuge with rancher Nash Montgomery. Drawn to his quiet strength and unwavering kindness, she discovers a life she never believed she deserved. But freedom comes at a cost, and Penelope's past refuses to release its grip. As threats close in and love deepens, she and Nash must fight not only for their future, but for the right to shape their own destiny. In a land carved by hardship, their hearts learn the true meaning of courage. In 1879, the New Mexico territory was a land of long horizons, harsh winds, and quiet battles fought in the shadows of daily life. For Penelope Mills, those battles had begun the day she entered the service of Charles Pennington, a wealthy, respected man in public, but behind closed doors, a tyrant with a talent for twisting fear into obedience. Penelope had come to his estate young, hopeful, and eager to earn her keep. But hope had a way of withering under the weight of constant pressure, threats, and the unspoken understanding that she belonged not to herself, but to him. She woke before sunrise each morning, lighting lamps and sweeping hallways before the household stirred. She scrubbed floors until her hands cracked, cooked meals she rarely tasted, and endured Pennington's cutting whispers of what would happen if she ever tried to leave. "You have nothing out there," he would say smoothly. "No money, no kin, no future. I'm all you've got." It wasn't just the words that trapped her, it was how convincing they sounded after years of hearing them. But life has a way of placing unexpected turning points in the path of the weary. Penelope first saw Nash Montgomery on a day when the wind blew dust so thick it blurred the landscape into smears of brown and gold. She had stepped outside the estate to gather laundry off the line when she spotted a horse approaching from the distant ridge. The rider sat tall, broad-shouldered, relaxed in the saddle, as though he belonged to the land itself. When he slowed near the gate to ask for directions, Penelope had answered politely, her eyes lowered out of habit. She hadn't meant to meet his gaze. But when she did, something in his expression made her pause. Nash Montgomery didn't look at her the way other men did, not with entitlement, not with casual dismissal. Instead, he looked at her as though she were a person worth seeing. "Thank you, miss," he had said with a gentle nod, tipping his hat before riding off. She didn't expect to see him again. Men like him didn't linger near places like Pennington's estate. Yet 2 days later, she encountered him again near town. Penelope had been sent to fetch supplies, her hands trembling from the fear of forgetting any item on Pennington's list. Nash noticed her struggling to tie down a sack on her wagon and stepped forward without hesitation. "Let me help," he said. She tried to refuse, fearing Pennington's reaction if he saw her speaking to a stranger, but Nash's steady hands were already securing the load. When he smiled, something fluttered in her chest, a feeling she couldn't name. Each time she went into town over the following weeks, Nash seemed to appear. Sometimes he greeted her briefly. Other times he walked beside her for a moment, speaking in that warm, calm voice that made her feel, for the first time in years, like her thoughts mattered. Penelope was cautious, always glancing over her shoulder, always wary of Pennington's shadow following her. Yet she found herself drawing strength from these stolen moments of kindness. Nash noticed things about her that others overlooked, the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked downward whenever someone raised their voice, the faded bruises she tried to hide beneath long sleeves. He never pushed her to speak, but his quiet concern lingered in every word he said. One afternoon, when the market was crowded and noisy, a cart rolled over Penelope's foot. The pain made her gasp and lose her balance, and before she could fall, Nash caught her by the arms, steadying her gently. "You're hurt," he said softly, worry flickering across his features. "I'm fine," she whispered quickly, pulling back as though burned. "Please, it's nothing." But Nash wasn't fooled. He watched her limp, watched her grit her teeth against the pain, and something inside him ached. It wasn't long before Pennington noticed the change in her, the small flicker of life returning to her eyes, the subtle shift in her posture. It enraged him. He tightened her workload, doubled her duties, and reminded her of her place with sharper threats. "Don't let me catch you speaking to people who don't concern this household," he warned. "You belong here. And you will stay here." Yet even as fear gnawed at her, Penelope found herself thinking of Nash in quiet moments. Thinking of how it felt to be spoken to with respect, how it felt to be seen. One evening, after a particularly brutal scolding from Pennington, Penelope slipped out behind the stables just to breathe. Nash was there, tending to one of his horses near the riverbank. When he saw her, his expression softened instantly. He walked toward her with slow, careful steps, sensing her distress. "Penelope," he said gently, "what's wrong?" Her lips trembled. She shook her head, unable to form words. Nash didn't touch her, he simply stood beside her, giving her the space to speak if she wished. Tears she had held back for years welled in her eyes, and before she could stop them, they fell. "I can't stay there anymore," she whispered. "But he won't let me go. He says I owe him everything." "You don't owe him your life," Nash said quietly, his voice steady as stone. "You deserve better, Penelope. You deserve freedom." She looked at him, her breath catching. No one had ever said that to her, not once. "But I have nowhere to go." "You have my ranch," Nash replied. "Not as a debt. Not as charity. Simply because I want to see you safe." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Penelope had long stopped believing that anyone might care for her without expecting something in return. But Nash's eyes held no deception, no demand, only sincerity. Over the next few days, she thought endlessly about his offer. Every cruel order from Pennington, every sleepless night, every moment she spent staring at the door wondering when she might be free pushed her closer to a decision she once believed she would never make. She met Nash again at dusk outside town, her breath trembling in her chest. "If I leave," she whispered, "he'll come after me." "Then let him," Nash replied softly but firmly. "He'll have to go through me. You won't face him alone." His confidence lit a spark of courage in her heart, one that finally outshone her fear. That night, with nothing but a small bag of belongings and her pounding heartbeat, Penelope walked away from the estate that had stolen years of her life. The desert air felt different, still harsh, still cold, but suddenly filled with possibility. Nash met her along the road with his horse, his expression warm with relief. "You're safe now," he said as he helped her climb up. For the first time in years, Penelope believed it. As they rode toward his ranch beneath a sky scattered with stars, she felt the invisible chains around her heart start to fall away. Nash wasn't just offering her a roof or protection, he was offering her something she had never dared imagine. A choice. A future. A life beyond fear. And as her head rested lightly against his shoulder, Penelope Mills realized that freedom wasn't a distant dream anymore. It was finally within reach. In the weeks that followed Penelope's escape, life on Nash Montgomery's ranch unfolded with a gentleness she had never known. Mornings arrived softly, without shouting, without the dread of footsteps in the hallway. She woke to the scent of coffee drifting through the cabin and the quiet sound of Nash tending to the animals outside. Sometimes she stepped onto the porch before sunrise just to watch him move across the yard, calm, capable, unharried by anger or cruelty. It took time for her to realize that he wasn't performing kindness, he simply lived it. Slowly, Penelope began to unravel the habits that years under Pennington had carved into her. She no longer flinched at every sudden noise. Her hand steadied. Her voice returned. And Nash never pushed her, he simply created space for her to breathe, to speak, to exist without fear. He invited her to sit with him during supper, to ride with him across the pasture, to help him choose fabric for the new curtains he wanted to put up before winter. Small things. Simple things. But to Penelope, they felt like a new kind of miracle. Their bond deepened with a quiet certainty. He didn't try to shape her into anything else or hurry her healing. Instead, he allowed her to grow into her own strength. She began to smile more, laugh softly at his dry humor, and walk with her chin lifted instead of bent. And as each day passed, she felt herself falling into a life she had once thought unreachable. When Nash asked her to marry him, he didn't kneel with grand gestures or crowded witnesses. They were sitting beside the creek, feet dipped in the cool water after a long day of ranch work. He held her hand gently, running his thumb across her knuckles as though memorizing her every scar. Then he said her name so softly it felt like a prayer. "I want you beside me for the rest of my life, Penny. Not because you needed a place to run to. Because you're the woman I want as my partner, my wife." Her breath caught, and for a moment the world stilled. She had been owned, ordered, manipulated, and broken by a man who never saw her as anything but property. To be asked, not claimed, was a gift she hadn't known how to dream of. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered the word that would change everything. Yes. Planning the wedding brought a new kind of joy to her days, but it also awakened the darker corners of her past. Word travels fast in the harsh stretches of the territory, and it wasn't long before Pennington learned that Penelope had not only fled, but found someone willing to stand for her. The first sign came in the form of a letter, delivered by a trembling stable boy. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, elegant, dripping with venom. "You belong to me. Come back, or I will come for you." Penelope's hands shook as she read it, the echo of old fear clawing up her spine. Nash took the letter from her, jaw tightening as he read the threat. Without a word, he tossed it into the fire. The flames devoured the message, curling its edges into ash. "He can write all he wants," Nash said calmly, drawing her close. "But he'll never touch you again." She wanted to believe him completely, but terror is a stubborn thing. It lurks in old memories, waiting for moments like this to surface. Nash felt her tension and held her tighter, pressing a gentle kiss to the crown of her head. "You're not alone anymore," he reminded her. "Not ever." For a few days, the threat was silent. Peace returned in small doses, Penelope working in the garden, Nash repairing the barn roof, wedding fabrics draped across the kitchen table. But the quiet couldn't hide the storm that was forming on the horizon. One evening, as the sky bled into shades of rose and gold, a rider approached the ranch gate. It wasn't Pennington, not yet, but one of his men, a hulking figure with a sneer that sent cold dread through Penelope. Nash stepped in front of her instantly, squaring his shoulders. "What business do you have here?" Nash asked. The man shrugged as if the answer were obvious. "She needs to come back. Mr. Pennington says she's run off with things she owes." Penelope's breath caught. Nash didn't budge. "She owes him nothing," he said. "And if he wants to test that, he can come himself." The man smirked. "He plans to." Nash's jaw flexed with controlled fury, but he kept his voice level. "Then tell him this, he'll meet my gun on the porch before he ever reaches her." The man hesitated for a fraction of a second before riding off, dust trailing behind him. Penelope clutched Nash's arm, her voice trembling. "He won't stop." "No," Nash agreed. "But neither will I." That night, Nash checked every window twice, every lock, every lantern. He stayed awake long after Penelope fell asleep, sitting by the door with his rifle across his lap, determined to protect the life they were building. And Penelope, waking briefly in the moonlight, felt a swell of gratitude so fierce it ached. She had spent years being protected by fear, punishment, manipulation, threats. Now she was protected by love. But Pennington's final attempt came in a way neither of them expected. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright. Penelope stood behind the curtain of the small church, wearing the simple white dress she had sewn by hand. Her heart fluttered not with fear, but with excitement. Guests filled the benches, murmuring softly as they waited. Nash stood near the altar, nervous in a quiet way, running a hand through his hair as he glanced toward the door. Then the doors burst open. Pennington strode inside, face twisted with fury, his voice slicing through the church as he shouted her name. Gasps filled the room. Penelope froze, her pulse hammering. Every muscle in her body remembered the old fear. But Nash moved before anyone else could react. He stepped between Pennington and Penelope with a calm, steady presence that silenced the entire church. "You're not welcome here," Nash said, voice low and controlled. "She's mine." Pennington snarled. "She belongs to me." "No," Nash replied, louder this time, so every witness could hear. "She belongs to herself." Pennington lunged, but several townsmen restrained him, neighbors who had watched Penelope rebuild her life, men who had heard whispers of Pennington's cruelty and were no longer willing to look away. The sheriff took hold of Pennington, locking irons around his wrists as the tyrant shouted curses that no longer held power. As Pennington was dragged from the church, Penelope felt her knees weaken. Not from fear, but from relief so overwhelming it nearly knocked her off her feet. Nash reached her in seconds, taking her hands into his. "It's over," he murmured. "You're free, Penny. Truly free." She leaned into him, tears falling not from sorrow, but from the final release of years of captivity. The wedding proceeded with a warmth and joy that made the morning's chaos feel like a distant memory. When Penelope walked down the aisle, every step felt like a reclaiming of her life. And when she reached Nash, her partner, her protector, her love, she felt her heart settle into a peace she had never known. Their vows weren't fancy or scripted. They were simple, honest promises spoken with trembling voices and shining eyes. When Nash kissed her, the room erupted in cheers. Penelope felt the last remnants of her past slip away, carried off like dust in the desert wind. In the days and months that followed, she grew into a version of herself that she had never had the chance to be, strong, confident, joyful. She worked alongside Nash on the ranch, planned a future built on mutual respect, and filled their home with a warmth she had once believed impossible. Their marriage became more than a union. It was a testament to resilience, to healing, to the courage it took to choose love over fear. Together, they shaped a new destiny, one written not by domination or despair, but by freedom and tenderness. And in the vast quiet of the New Mexico territory, Penelope Mills finally found her forever home, not as a servant, not as a frightened girl running from her past, but as a woman deeply, fiercely loved. Forever unbound.